So we're going to move on right now to our A topic of conversation today. You might have heard something about President Trump and his executive actions a little while ago, but more recently he's made some moves on immigration. So we thought we'd bring you some info on United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They're under the moniker of the Department of Homeland Security. And I'm going to take you to our first slide right now. So U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, as they're known, created in 2003 by merging two agencies that effectively created the largest investigative body in the United States, just behind the FBI. They're number two, as created in 2003. Now, their primary duties, as they list them, are the enforcement and removal operations of those who are undocumented and living in the United States, and Homeland Security investigations, stuff like keeping Americans safe. One of their largest actions was undertaken recently at the Super Bowl, where the world was watching. Homeland Security was investigating and securing all of the events surrounding America's largest football night. Going to move on a little bit more and take a deeper dive into U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. In the fiscal year 2016, which ended in the end of September of 2016, ICE officials removed or returned some 240,255 individuals. Now, this was in the period from October of 15 to September of 2016. And of those more than 240,000 people who were removed, 174,923 of them were attempting to illegally enter the United States or had just made it across the border. So that made up the bulk of the people who were removed from the United States by ICE. And of that 240,000 number, 65,332 people were actually apprehended just walking around like any of us would on a normal day. These were people who had overstayed visas or were found to not be documented and targeted by ICE. So 65,332 of those folks were apprehended terra firma inside the U.S., not at a border crossing. So that's just a little look at some of the work that ICE is undertaking and some of the actions and how they've affected folks. We're going to get into a lot more of that in our A block.
Okay, so on their official website, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement states their mission to enforce federal laws governing border control, customs, trade, and immigration to promote homeland security and public safety. Earlier this month, ICE agents began a series of raids targeting undocumented immigrants. Amidst the raids and arrests are reports of checkpoints and sweeps that have stoked fear, confusion, and straight-up panic among immigrants.
That's right. And despite all this anxiety, there are a host of organizations dedicated to providing immigrants with credible information about their rights when dealing with federal immigration officials, including one in East New York that brings together working families and low and moderate income communities to fight for social justice and economic justice. And here to tell us about some of that work is Renata Pumarol, the Deputy Director at New York Communities for Change. And I'm sorry if I killed your name. I'm very happy to have you here. All right, score one.
It wasn't too bad. Thank you so much for joining us, Renata. So yesterday, Councilmember Jermaine Williams issued a statement urging his constituents not to panic, right? But there have been rumors swirling all over the place that ICE officials are popping up all over, showing up at people's doors. What are your community members actually seeing?
So, I mean, some of our community members have actually reported seeing ICE officers in their neighborhoods. I mean, it's very hard to tell because at times they are not wearing a uniform that says ICE, right?
They don't always walk around with those ICE flak jackets on. Yeah.
So I think like what is important for our communities, for immigrant communities, is to really come together and organize and come to know your rights trainings and learn how to protect themselves if they encounter ICE in the streets or at their homes.
So speaking of knowing your rights, this would be a perfect point to bring in someone who's joining us via Skype. She's Camille Mackler, the Director of Legal Initiatives at the New York Immigration Coalition. Thanks for joining us today, Camille. I can only imagine that this is one of your busier days.
Busy or months or years. Sure,
Yes.
but thanks for having me.
So, Camille, we want to talk about some of the rights that people have, even if they may not be documented citizens, they still do have rights as they are sitting in this country right now.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you still have some constitutional protections. You're protected from unreasonable search and seizure. You're protected from self-incrimination. So the first thing we tell people is remain silent. Without an attorney, you do have a right to an attorney, not a free attorney, but you do have a right to a lawyer. And if you're detained in New York City, actually, you'll be given a free lawyer paid for by the city because we have the first and only public defender system for immigrants here. But more to the point, don't sign documents without talking to someone. Don't answer questions. Don't open your door. If they say they have a warrant, make them slide it under the door. If it's not a warrant signed by a judge, if it's just a warrant issued by their own office, they can't come in unless you give them permission. So make sure that you don't do anything that they would interpret as consent to enter your home.
Gotcha.
Camille, can you actually clarify that for us? What is this document that they had that they're printing at their own office that they're calling a warrant? Is it actually any sort of real warrant?
It's an administrative warrant. So, they do have administrative power to enforce immigration laws, and that gives them the right to arrest somebody who's violating immigration laws. But it's not a judicial warrant, so it doesn't give them permission to enter private property, for example.
So, Renata, we know that there have been a lot of Twitter things bursting all over and just in the networks of saying, listen, I saw somebody on the corner of Flatbush or wherever sort of location you are. I wonder if people in your organization or families have contacted you or if you've heard any of this chatter about ICE officials being in our neighborhoods.
Yeah, usually actually our members are the first ones to call us or to contact us and let us know if they saw some activity. I think it's very important to confirm that activity, to confirm that ICE was there, and then let people know about it.
How are people feeling in general?
I think people, obviously after, the latest memo, which, I think it's just plain and simple declaring war on our communities. I think people feel nervous, but I think it's very important, again, for us to come together, stay organized, learn our rights, and continue fighting. And I think it's very important, actually, for communities that are not going to be impacted, for privileged communities, to actually be out there protesting, rallying, and signing up for rapid response programs so that you can go out there and protect immigrants, because this is clearly one of the most fascist policies that Trump is putting forward.
So I want to go to the lawyer for just a second, since we got you on the line. I have a statement that was released yesterday by the acting director at ICE. And he said, ICE conducts these kinds of targeted enforcement operations regularly and has for many years. The focus of these enforcement operations is consistent with the routine targeted arrest carried out by ICE's fugitive operations team on daily basis. So I just want to know, from your experience, is this true? Are we just paying more attention than before because there's a different president who has a lot more rhetoric? Or is this business as usual for immigrations and customs enforcement?
I think that, we have seen large-scale operations in the past, and we have seen these kinds of, activities like we saw last week. We saw it last year, I think was the most visible publicly. What we're not seeing is the tactics. That's new, and the sort of recklessness in how they're rolling out these policies, and the fact that they've said that they're going to arrest everyone. And I think just that, right, the expansion of priorities to the point that everyone's a priority, so there are no priorities. That's certainly new. That's not business as usual. The way in which they're interacting with communities, the careless disregard for private information that they're putting out there that we've seen, and also, frankly, the careless disregard for the truth. ICE has been caught making questionable statements at best around the country for the last couple of weeks. I wouldn't say any of that is business as usual. This is definitely signs of a new regime.
So just one more thing before we go on. ICE on their website has a fact sheet. I gave some numbers earlier about the financial year that closed, but this is current as to this year. In New York, they've arrested 41 people in ICE operations, saying they targeted criminal aliens, illegal re-entrants, and immigration fugitives. So just to give us some kind of scale, that happens to be the lowest number because there were like 51 in San Antonio, 161 in LA, 235 in this group of 6 Midwestern states, and 190 folks in Georgia for some reason.
Yeah, whoa.
But New York only 41. What do you think that is about? Do you think it really is a testament to the work that you guys are doing here in New York and having the backing of someone like Melissa Mark Viverito and the New York City Council saying, we're not going for it?
Right. Do we really still have the protections here of a so-called sanctuary city?
So the first thing to know is that New York, as far as we understand it, was actually, this operation from the last week or 2 weeks ago had been planned for a while, and New York was only added a week before it was carried out. So I think the low numbers may, in a way, be a reflection of that. The other part is that we did not see in New York what we saw in other jurisdictions, what we call collateral arrests. So they went in to arrest one person, found 5 more, arrested all of them. We didn't really see that in New York, at least not in that particular operation. And I do think that the protections that the city has put in place, definitely helps protect immigrants to a certain extent, especially because NYPD not cooperating with ICE, and that's been sort of verified by their own statements, right, of frustration at the fact that NYPD won't cooperate with ICE. That in of itself speaks to the impact of all of that, I think. But they say 41 criminals, and you look at what they were actually arrested for, or charged with, and it's not what we, I think, would commonly think of as a threat to public safety, or that we think would be deserving of permanent exile from your spouse, your children, your work, your community, your life.
What kinds of crimes are those, Camille?
And I think there were a lot of disorderly conduct, some which isn't even a misdemeanor, it's a violation, some DUIs, some pretty, we know that they were up in traffic court in Hudson, New York, up in Columbia County the other day, so some pretty minor violations. And we see that in the orders and the memos that they've so drastically expanded the definition of what constitutes a crime or criminal history that, again, almost everyone qualifies.
So what about that, Renata, about New York in the status as a sanctuary city? How do you think ICE and the federal government views us and some sort of that collateral spillover where if they come for one, 10 people end up going in thing?
Right. I mean, I think it's great, like as Camille said, that that we have Bill de Blasio committed to that the NYPD will not cooperate with ICE. However, we do need to talk about broken windows policing, right? Like all those minor infractions. I mean, the fact that broken windows policing, treats minor civil offenses as criminal, puts undocumented and documented people at risk of deportations. So if we want to protect immigrants, we have to talk also about ending broken windows policing.
Right, because once you're putting them in the system, they basically have to share that information with the federal agencies, right?
Exactly.
So I want to talk just for a second about the chilling effect that these actions, whether they're executive actions or knocking on your door, have on the entire New York community. Because as till now, dreamers, DACA recipients who were children when they came here have been sort of spared. But I know just personally how much of a burden that is for them, knowing that they're like the golden child when everyone in their family could be taken away from them, but they're the ones who get some kind of pass.
Right. I mean, we do see a lot of anxiety, in immigrant families, right? And it's pertinent to that, right? Like, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen with DACA. There wasn't anything about DACA in the latest memo, but we do know that Daniel Ramirez was detained in Seattle, right? So we're paying a lot of attention to that.
And it was a program that Trump said he would go after when he was going around campaigning. That's a word for it.
Right.
So we'll see.
Yeah.
Right. So Renata, what are you saying to your community members now? What are you doing? What can they do right now to prepare, to know their rights if they don't know them already?
So I think what you can do is, please go to nycommunities.org. We have Know Your Rights training all over the city, in East New York, in Flatbush, in the Bronx. I also advise people that want to join the resistance and that want to protect immigrants to sign for a rapid response program. we have one. You can text resist NY to 33222 if you want to sign up, and you would get notified if we have rallies, if we have protests in order to protect immigrants and to protest this terrible policy, but to also like step up and be able to mobilize rapidly if someone is at risk of deportation.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks for joining us, Camille, and for the work that you do at the New York Immigration Coalition. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I suspect we'll talk a lot more over the course of these next few years.
I'm happy to come back.
All right.